welcome to another video where we're reviewing some material that we've discussed throughout the year. I know it's a lot to take in, which is why we're doing this video as a bit of a review. So if you're about to take a test, if you want to revamp some of your study materials, if you're confused about something, this is the place to be. And we've been discussing the Age of Exploration, otherwise known as the Age of Discovery. So obviously, as the name suggests, this is when people are going out sailing, people are going out finding new places. And we've already discussed the why, and we've even discussed the how. The why being some of the motivations. We discussed the 3 G's, God, glory, and gold. And then the how is more of the technological advances that are being used at the time, specifically on the ships, things like the astrolabe, things like the magnetic compass, things like the caravel, the type of ship that was used. So all of that stuff is super important. Today, what I really want to go over is some of the important people. Now, we're not going to be able to discuss every single person because that would be a very long video. But we are going to discuss about 3, 4, 5 of these key people that are involved in this age of exploration, age of discovery, where they were from, who financed them, and what they actually did. So, let's get started. And first up, I need to tell you guys that this is really about Spain versus Portugal. Now, there are other people involved, like England has John Cabot and some other people going out and sailing, but by and large, the leaders in exploration are the Portuguese and the Spanish. The Portuguese really started out and do a phenomenal job at going around sailing because they try to find trade routes, which is super important in the age of exploration. Trade routes. Remember it. Trade routes are important in the age of exploration. All right, now that I'm done with that obnoxious statement, let's move on. So, Spain versus Portugal. Portugal kind of starts it off, and then Spain's like, well, we don't want Portugal to win, so we're going to start going out and sailing and doing stuff. And that's exactly what they do. And again, that's not to say that other places like England aren't going out and doing this, but that is to say that Spain and Portugal are doing it the most effectively and in the most quantity. And so those are the people that we're really going to focus on. So number one, because Portugal's trying to find a trade route, and remember, where are they trying to find a trade route? The answer is India, or the Asian continent, because these are where all the spices are. These are where the markets are, where they want to actually go and get some of this stuff back to their countries. Things like pepper, cinnamon, other types of spices for the preservation of food and taste, and to open up new labor markets and new selling markets, because it's all about trade routes in the age of exploration. They weren't just going out to sailing just because. Maybe some of them, but by and large, it's the trade routes. It's the God, glory, and gold, the wealth, the actual building of money, of getting stuff in. So anyway, Portugal's going to want to be another country, just like everybody else, who wants to reach India. But nobody else knows how to do that yet. They have this theory that if they go out on the ocean, they could get to India somehow. But they don't quite know how, and nobody's even got further than the middle part of Africa, the African coast. And you could see a map here that'll show that. So nobody's really gone that far. But then in comes Bartolomeu Dias. And I don't know if I pronounced the name right, but hey, I'm not a pronouncing teacher. I'm a history teacher. So Bartolomeu Dias in the late 15th century is going to actually sail to the southernmost tip of Africa. So he doesn't quite go around the bend, as you can see on the map. He doesn't reach India, but he does bring them a step further. He does bring them all the way down to what's known as the Cape of Good Hope, showing that there is good hope for them to reach India pretty soon. And that pretty soon does happen, because in walks another Portuguese explorer, Vasco de Gama. Now, Vasco da Gama is going to go and pretty much follow the same route that Diaz did and go to the Cape of Good Hope. But then da Gama is going to say, you know what, we can go further this. And he's going to round that southern tip of Africa, and he's going to go into the Indian Ocean, through it, and up into India. And he's known as really the first European to actually reach India through a water route. Because before this, the only way that connected Asia and Europe, it was the land routes, the Silk Road. But we've already discussed how that was really not too much of an option anymore because of the different groups that controlled sectors of that road, that would tax, that would ambush, that would steal stuff. It was very dangerous and it wasn't cost effective. So the water route was really the most effective way of doing it, if they could find a way there. And find a way there they did. But they're not going to be done yet. Because again, I said it was Portugal versus Spain. So Spain's going to want to be in on this at the same time. And the guy who I want to talk to you guys about is perhaps the most famous explorer of all time, either rightfully or wrongfully, much controversy, and that is Christopher Columbus. Now, Christopher Columbus did get his financing from Spain, and he did want to reach Asia, just like everybody else. That was the goal. However, he's not going to do it. Because his theory was, if he sails westward, from Europe towards what we now know as the Americas, if he sails west, he could eventually reach Asia by sailing west. And he thinks that that'll be actually easier than doing what the Portuguese did. So Christopher Columbus's idea is really bringing into the fact that the globe is spherical, that it's rounded. And there's a lot of controversy out there that says that Christopher Columbus and other explorers wouldn't have known that the earth was round yet, and Christopher Columbus was the first person to actually believe that. That is a lie. The idea that the earth was round was pretty much well established by this time by anybody educated, and that meant usually rich and wealthy. And Christopher Columbus was one of them, as was Vasco da Gama, as was Bartolomeu Dias, as are all these other people in the age of exploration. By and large, none of these people thought that the earth was flat, for the most part. Can you find exceptions to this? Sure, but by and large, these guys believed that the earth was round. And because of this, Christopher Columbus thinks, all I got to do is sail in that direction, and eventually I come around and get to the place where I want to go. But the problem he had is he was right in that theory. But the problem was he didn't know just how big the world actually was. Because he didn't know that North America, Central America, and South America were over in that direction. He thought that basically he would just sail for a little bit westward and then he would reach India. Because at this time, their map of the world was really just Europe and the Asian continent. They didn't really know of anywhere else. So Christopher Columbus is going to set sail, and you guys know the story. He sails with these different boats. A couple of them were actually caravels that we've talked about. And he's going to sail westward, and he's going to reach the Americas. But here comes another thing that everybody needs to know. Despite Columbus Day being celebrated in the United States of America, Columbus never set foot on North America. He did, however, set foot in Central America. He reached on 4 different journeys. He had 4 voyages. He reached the Central American area, the Hispaniola area, the coast of Cuba, all those areas down south from America and even from Mexico. Central America, right? So Christopher Columbus did reach those areas, but he never stepped foot on North America. So if you hear anybody say that Christopher Columbus founded North America, you are wrong. First of all, people were already living in North America. And second of all, there were people well before Christopher Columbus who actually sailed and got successfully to North America. Some of them even set up colonies towards the north of Canada and places like that. But suffice it to say, that's another myth that needs to be debunked, right? Christopher Columbus did not settle North America. He didn't even step foot. He didn't even necessarily know it was there, okay? He just goes to Central America and sets up his version of colonies there. And Spain is going to have a huge influence in Central America for the rest of history, which is why in the Western Hemisphere in Central America, they speak Spanish, Whereas in Europe, some of these more Spanish places are actually Portuguese, like Brazil. In Brazil, they could speak Portuguese, right? And that is because of what I'm about to talk to you about in a minute or two. But what I need you to know so far is the Portuguese successfully got to India. Christopher Columbus was not successful in reaching India, but he found a whole nother place. And that was just as good because, again, they're going to set up some colonies there so that Spain can make money through raw materials and goods under the system of mercantilism, whereas essentially a mother country wants to colonize different places under imperialism, because that's essentially what it is, and basically take from them cheap goods and cheap labor and then produce their own goods and services and sell it for a higher price so that the mother country is always making money. Cha-ching, cha-ching. You have Portugal and you have Spain. You have this age of exploration, this race to try to find India. But now there's going to be some tensions in the late 15th century because you have both of these countries trying to colonize different lands now depending on where they're sailing. And so they come up with a treaty. And the treaty is known as the Treaty of Tordesillas. And it's signed in the late 15th century. That's the end of the 1400s. It was somewhere around 1494, 1495. And they're going to set up a line of demarcation. And you can see it on the map here on the screen, what that looked like. Essentially, Spain is going to be allowed to colonize and claim land west of the line in the Western Hemisphere. Essentially where Christopher Columbus sailed. If you can find North America, South America, and Central America, that's essentially the areas that Spain is now allowed to go to and sail to and colonize and use and claim for their own. Whereas east of the line, you're talking about the more European-centric area and the Asian continent where India is. That's what Portugal gets, right? Now, when they signed this treaty, Portugal thought that they were getting the big part of the deal. And they did get a good portion of this deal, right? They were able to get all their places that were close to their home and a lot of those places that were also including India. So they were able to get rich off of that. But what they didn't know is how much they were giving Spain, because nobody knew yet, because nobody saw and discovered all those areas in Central America and South America, North America. Nobody knew just how vast that area was that Spain was getting. But suffice it to say, the big things that you need to remember in this age of exploration, specifically from this video, is the few people that we've talked about. You have Spain versus Portugal in a race to get to India. You have different thought processes and ideologies of sailing happening. Christopher Columbus wants to go west to reach India, but he doesn't get there because he runs into Central America, and then they start colonizing there. Whereas you have the Portuguese sailing east and around the Cape of Good Hope, around the tip of Africa to get to India, and they actually make it successfully. But then, because of the tensions happening, in order to avoid any conflict, they sign a treaty, the Treaty of Tordesillas, which sets a line of demarcation, basically saying Spain can get anything on this side of the line, whereas Portugal can get everything on this side of the line.